Domestic policy can only defeat us. Foreign policy can kill us. Good evening and welcome. This is Face the Nation. 8th of November 2016. An eventful day for the entire world. Why? The election of Donald J. Trump as the 45th President of the United States of America. A man who challenged corruption, a man who challenged the status quo. Many thought he would be defeated, many thought that he wouldn't make it. However, he challenged the status quo and was elected as the 45th President of the United States of America. One of the powerhouses as far as the world is concerned. Our topic of discussion today is foreign policy, democracy, and also where is the world really heading right now? Why is it that the people want change? Why is it that people are fighting against change? People want one basic thing at the end of the day, that is change. And that is what they envisage. Example, the 8th of January 2015 elections here in Sri Lanka. People wanted change. Where is the world really heading today? What is going to happen tomorrow? We have with us three eminent personalities in the studios with us this evening to discuss all this and more. Let me introduce them to you. Joining us this evening for the first time on the show is Dr. Harinder Vidanage, Director, Bandaranaike Center for International Studies. Good evening and welcome to the show, Dr. Vidanage. Also joining us this evening on the show is no stranger to Face the Nation. That is Professor Rajiv Jayasinghe, former Member of Parliament, as well as the former leader of the Liberal Party. Nice to have you on board after a few months, Professor Jayasinghe.
Nice to be here.
Also joining us this evening is Asanga Abhegunasekara, Director General, Institute of National Security Studies, Sri Lanka. Nice to have you on board as well for the first time on the show. Let's start off tonight's show with Dr. Harinder Vidanage, Director, Bandaranaike Center for International Studies. Dr. Vidanage, what happened on the 8th of November 2016 was quite an interesting one. The election of Donald J. Trump. He was an individual who challenged the status quo, who fought against corruption, and then people's right to vote reigned supreme. He was elected as the 45th President of the United States. What really happened?
Well, I think contrary to many speculations that Hillary Clinton will win, there were kind of forces that directed attention to a probable Donald Trump victory, and those forces were kind of significant internal and external transformations that was going through in the world as well as within the United States. So, for example, the United States, as you mentioned in the beginning, the American people were totally disgruntled with the existing way of politics. When I say existing way of politics, it meant the biparty system, the political establishment, and they felt none of those political elites were serving their interests. When I say their interests, the general public of the United States. That was one major reason. Two, there was a major thrust by Republicans, irrespective of who was representing them, to defeat the Democrats. The Republicans were didn't have a presidency in the last 8 years, and of course they were in control of the two houses, but not a presidency. So they felt that it was high time that they should get a Republican president. And of course, these two forces, along with other peripheral forces, populist voices, the United States, I try to tell people the United States is not one country. It's a country of many countries. It is the United States at the end of the day. And the north, the south, the east, the west, the central plains, they're all very different. But most of the states in the U.S. had a set of common grievances, and most of those grievances came from ever since the economic crisis, even before. There was severe unemployment, and especially there were structural transformations. For example, industries were closing down, manufacturing was being outsourced, and living in the U.S. in the last 5 years, I saw I saw how cities kind of small semi-suburban cities kind of went away, how manufacturing plants closed down, how people went out of jobs. And of course, something we didn't see was the white working class the situation of the plight of the white working class, which had not changed. The median income of the white working class had not changed in the last 30-40 years.
Doctor, take a look at what exactly the sentiments expressed by Donald J. Trump prior to the election. He said that he criticized the electoral system in the United States and said if he gets defeated, it's simply because of the electoral colleges in that country. Hillary Clinton wins the most popular vote, the popular vote, by 2 million votes. However, Donald J. Trump emerged victorious. What is your thinking?
The thinking is very simple. The founding fathers of the United States created this system to provide a kind of equal representation to all states. Of course, with the United States, the states, the 50 states have different populations. That doesn't. So in a way, it was actually, the irony is the Electoral College was set up to prevent the rise of populism. The whole logic was behind that, to allow states to be heard more, states representatives to be represented when to making the final decision in electing the president, because you have huge populous states like California, Texas, New York, and you have sparsely populous states, but they wanted to give each state a chance. So though we look at it from this perspective of popular vote versus electoral college, I think the idea behind the founding fathers was to make sure that it was not populism, but it was but ironically, that the reverse happened to a certain extent.
Thank you very much. That, of course, was Dr. Harinder Vidanagate, Director, Bandaranaike Center for International Studies. I now focus my attention to Asangambe Gunasekara, Director General, Institute of National Security Studies, Sri Lanka. Asanga, what lessons can Sri Lanka learn from the election that we just saw on the 8th of November 2016, the US presidential polls? Is there anything that we can learn from the election?
There is a lot we could learn, actually, because we should understand what's happening to the world order. On the same day, 9th of November, I launched a book, the Towards a Better World Order, and the Sinhalese translation. In the book, basically, I explain what's happening to the global liberal order and what's going on in the world. What you can see is moving out from a multipolar world to a multiplex world, which is so many players rather than 2 or 3 state powers. You have many powers, basically non-governmental organizations, citizen movements. You see a lot of power, pillars of power, and a lot of complexity in the world system, and that has to be understood very well. And you could see from the results of the Brexit, Philippines, many other results, and this could actually move into countries like France, Marine Le Pen's, I would say, and even in Germany and various other places in Europe. So there is a lot we could learn from what's happening outside, and how we should sort of orchestrate our own foreign policy, and how we should sort of maybe have an effective policy towards outside. So
most opinion polls suggested that Hillary Clinton will emerge victorious. Asanga, you spoke about Brexit, you spoke about Philippines. I want to add one more example to it, Canada. Everyone thought that the opposing side or the losing side would emerge victorious. However, it did not happen. Why? Why did the people choose otherwise?
I think it's a question of, the United States is the biggest, if you look at the military power wise, they spend about $500 billion, the largest. The economic power, there's a huge powerhouse. But there's nothing wrong with the powerhouse that they have. It's a question of leadership. Will they be able to sort of deliver the leadership?
So are you saying that Barack Obama didn't give that leadership to the United States?
No, he didn't. I think there was a question of leadership. The world wanted a leadership, a set of different values in here.
In which sense do you say that President Obama did not give leadership to the United States of America?
I mean, he got the Nobel Prize, if you look at it. I mean, at the beginning of his term. And what did he do actually? And before that, before delivering, he got the prize. But after his term, I mean, if you look at it, I mean, the leadership, there was a lack of leadership, like a global, the global leader, the U.S. to play a global leadership. I think that was something that is.
He brought in many initiatives. He brought in Obamacare. He reduced unemployment in the United States.
If you look at the dual the policy decisions, I mean dual set of rules for the world that he introduced. For example, one set of rules to Mosul, one set to Aleppo. He said there's human rights violations in Aleppo and then collateral damage in Mosul. So there's duplicity, I would say. Even Hillary Clinton, I mean, if a junior officer had done such a crime of the email scandal, he would be behind bars. So there's duplicity that people saw, and the youngsters didn't like this. And you could see that on the social media as well. The change was actually, they wanted some sort of a new beginning. I think that was the reason that Donald Trump was chosen.
Is that why people chose a businessman over a politician?
Yeah, 4.6 unemployment rates, as well as the economic condition is not so good. If you look at as a knowledge economy, what the United States try to promote, still the educational belt, the most famous university is still in the outer ring, basically closer to the coastal. It hasn't gone inside, internal to the country. So I think all these factors, the economic factors, affected quite a lot.
Thank you very much, Asanga Adegunaseka, Director General, Institute of National Security Studies in Sri Lanka. We will now move our attention to Professor Rajiv Vijayasinghe, a former nationalist parliamentarian as well as the former leader of the Liberal Party. Professor Vijayasinghe, you are an expert of international affairs. You've been very vocal about foreign policy in Sri Lanka as well. How do you view the victory of Donald J. Trump? Is it going to be dangerous for a country like Sri Lanka, or will there be no change in foreign policy?
Well, I very much hope that there will be a change for less danger, because quite frankly, Hillary Clinton was the most dangerous thing as far as Sri Lanka was concerned. We had long known this. Way back in 2008, I was head of the Peace Secretariat at the time, and we came across all the emails from the LTT supporters at the time, who are now wolves in sheep's clothing and pretend they're democratic. And they basically were saying, we have Hillary in our pocket, we funded her, she's entirely on our side. And that's why we were so delighted when Obama won the nomination. But Obama has really been a tragedy. If you look at his face now compared with that wonderful, fresh-faced, enthusiastic idealist of 8 years ago, you can really see Dorian Gray. And
people do age Professor Rajiv Vijayasinghe for sure. 8 years after,
the man's 10 years younger than me, and he looks much older now. But essentially his problem was he was captured by the establishment. And I was told, maybe the same thing will happen to Trump. But of course we have one salient difference, that Trump is an individualist. Obama was a conformist, and the first thing he did is he appointed Hillary Clinton Secretary of State, which spelled the end of Sri Lanka. I still recall when Bob Blake, who'd been a good friend of Sri Lanka during the war, sort of turned against us. One of my colleagues at the Peace Secretariat had worked for the State Department said, Bob, what's happened? He said, you forget I serve a different government. And we know now the sheer nastiness of that woman. I used to call her the Wicked Witch of the West, and I did so before she was not elected. And you know what? She had the temerity to claim. This woman who tried to attack the women whom her husband slept with, she accused Sri Lankan forces of using rape as a weapon of war. And when it became quite clear that this was untrue, she didn't have the grace to apologize. To paraphrase her, Hillary Clinton came, she lied, and she died. She died politically. I hope it will be a permanent death politically. It was not as horrible as what she inflicted on Colonel Gaddafi. This woman has supported extremists. Poor Obama.
Let's talk about Donald Trump.
He has created mayhem in the Middle East. And I was quite pleased to discover recently that he had actually not wanted the invasion of Libya, which he masterminded. Now Trump, I think I read an interesting article today, that he is in a sense torn between two forces in the Republican, some of whom still believe in the dogma of military power. But the others go back to the Republicans who defeated Woodrow Wilson with the League of Nations, who said we mustn't keep asserting ourselves, we will destroy our own country if we start forcing ourselves on others. That is what Hillary Clinton through Barack Obama did. I hope Donald Trump will actually stand by what he said. For instance, take this whole question of Islam. I believe very strongly that fundamental terrorism must be dealt with. But at the same time, you must be sympathetic to the causes that drive so many young people into extremism. This was the position I took up in Sri Lanka, where I felt the Tigers had to be defeated, but we had to do what we could for the Tamils. What does Hillary Clinton do? She supports the extremists. She gets rid of the moderates, Gaddafi, Assad. And these people who were actually trying to create a more pluralistic society in their countries, with women being educated, were absolutely tormented by this woman who supported ISIS.
Different?
It's disgusting. Well, he certainly is, for instance, more realistic about approaching Russia. You know, Hillary Clinton was a determined Cold Warrior. She was bitterly anti-Russian. I do hope very much that when Trump says he wants to talk to Russia, he means it. Because America had delusions of grandeur. As Kofi Annan said, when you think you're the only elephant in the room, you behave in a very different fashion. Trump is realistic enough to realize that though America is the most powerful nation, there are other nations with similar power.
What about China? Trump and China, how do you view that in the
Again, very similarly, he's a businessman, he's pragmatic. He doesn't have this idea that I'm afraid Clinton pushed, which is if you're not 100% our slave, you're our enemy. That was what she did to so many countries, and I'm afraid that had she become president, we would have seen extreme violence all over the world. And what we have seen in America, you know, don't forget, I saw this strange line from Jayanta Dhanapala. You know, democracy has died and populism has triumphed. I don't think Jayanta Dhanapala understands the meaning of language. Trump was elected on an electoral system. In discussing populism, you have to remember that the people ultimately must decide. You have to make sure that people are educated better, that people will decide with wisdom, but you cannot go around saying we, the elite, know better than the people. Because the country is about the people. I still remember over Brexit, my former dean, one of the few academics in Oxford to vote in favour of leaving, he said the juggernaut has to be stopped. The juggernaut being this enormous, powerful establishment that for the last 5 years has basically destroyed the world for so many people in poor situations.
Thank you very much, Professor Roger Vijay Singh, a former Member of Parliament as well as the former leader of the Liberal Party, for expressing your thoughts on the first round. Let me introduce our journalists this evening. On to my right is Nadim Mazin, on to my immediate left is Faraz Shaukat Ali, and on to my far left is Zulfiq Farzan. Faraz, let's start off with you. A new set today, a news line, a brand new set. You look like Larry King to me.
Yes, a lovely news set. And we have the Defence Secretary on, and tomorrow we have, I'll tell you at the end.
At the end. Yes, shoot.
This question is to Dr. Harindra, please. Do you think the election of Donald Trump is a rather telling indictment on the politicians of the democratic world?
Well, it is. It's because, I mean, there is this argument that liberal democracy is kind of coming to a natural death. Of course, that's a bit controversial, but it is telling because I think it's not just the politicians itself. So what we should understand is, rather than trying to understand Trump, but more than that, trying to understand what does he represent. What does his victory represents? His victory represents a clear kind of anger, a clear distaste, kind of detestation of political elitism. So political elitism is something that was I mean, it has been there for ever since history, but the liberal system, internally, externally, has kind of created institutions that has led to these political elites to kind of solidify. And after a while, what you see is that these liberal elites has been kind of running the world. So, for example, you know, if you look at the US presidential election, all the debates, most of the time was spent on foreign policy. But the American public, I mean, it's common sense knowledge. Many Americans are don't care about what happens in the world. They care about what's happening in their neighborhood. But why are these politicians talking so much about foreign policy? It's because there are 179 American families who run massive corporate entities which kind of are globally entrenched. And that's why they said, the political establishment was hostage to the lobbyists as well as the funders, who in a way so in a way it was not a democracy in that sense. Last year a Princeton study came out claiming the US was not a democracy in the last 30-40 years. So of course it is a telling indictment of a kind of a revulsion against that system. So it is like a metastasing of democratic procedures, democratic politicians into democratic political elites. So no different from
Dr. Vidyanathan, there is a general notion right now across the world that the US president does not incorporate his thinking when taking decisions. It's the CIA and the FBI who takes decisions, and the president just executes it. How far is this statement true?
Well, that's questionable. Of course, he or she takes significant advice. For example, when George Bush wanted to wage a war against Iran, because Iran was producing nuclear weapons, his vice president Dick Cheney was pushing him to bomb the nuclear facility in Natanz in Iran, and then his Secretary of Defense at that time, Robert Gates, told him, advised him, we are already at war with 2 Islamic countries in the Middle East. You don't want a third war. Let's look at another option. That's how they used the first real serious smart cyber munition to attack the plant rather than using kinetic attacks. So of course the presidency listens, but I think the president also takes certain decisions. So a lot of people are not discussing Obama in this context. So a lot of analysts in the US and globally blame Obama for Trump. It's because they say he was the president who by far exceeded his limits of executive power. He kind of used a panoply of regulations to supersede the Congress. So it can be Affordable Care Act, the Obamacare. It can be rights of gay and lesbian families, people who get insurance and all these things. But none of them were supported by the Congress in certain terms. So now people are arguing that he was undemocratic. Of course, and the drone program, right? Obama used more drone strikes than any other president in the history of the United States, which has killed nearly 10,000 or 20,000 civilians. And right, and the drone program has the Congress has no oversight. Of course, it's coming.
Asaka, do you agree with Dr. Vidyanathan's statement about Obama is a reason for Trump?
It's like this. I mean, come back to your question which you asked about the CIA or the involvement. Now, if you look at Trump's appointment, Mike Pompeo, he is the director now of the CIA, the new appointment, as well as Michael Flynn, who's the National Security Advisor. Both of the positions, Pompeo was the guy who basically who investigated on the Benghazi committee, as well as he was very vocal when Obama imposed lesser sanctions to Iran. So he was a critique of the Obama administration, and going so as well as Michael Flynn on the Islam and Islamic criticism. So you have two of them. I mean, you can't sort of. I think the decision making, if you look at Ted Sorensen's book, Decision Making in White House, there is a hand, of course, from the intelligence community that is coming in for the president's decision making. So you will see.
So you don't agree with you don't agree with Dr. Savind about the CIA or the FBI or the Secret Service being involved in decision making of a U.S. president?
No, I mean there is an involvement to a certain degree, but what I'm saying is now Pompeo will definitely come back to as the director of the CIA. There will be sanctions to Iran, definitely. I mean, you're going to get that. That's going to happen.
Just lifted a couple of months ago.
Yeah, so that could come back. The probability of coming back.
So a bit hypothetical, isn't it?
I mean, these are the people who actually was vocal about it, and highly criticizing Obama.
On that subject, now among the many policies that Donald Trump has advocated, including scrapping the nuclear deal with Iran, he said he's going to look at the relationship with Cuba, he's going to Trump is essentially, in the way that he's been portrayed from his time as a reality TV star, he's the quintessential American businessman. He's the symbol of excess. He's in his gold-plated tower, etc., etc. You spoke about values and duplicity. I'm not going to argue that Hillary Clinton was not duplicitous. The email scandal shows that she was anything that she was, very much duplicitous. But when you talk about values, Donald Trump is a man who has publicly accepted that he has evaded paying taxes. He's faced accusations of sexual abuse, defrauding people through his Trump University program. In spite of his claims to success, several of his companies have filed for bankruptcy. Can you explain to us why, for the American people, if it was a case of values, why they saw Hillary as duplicitous, but not Trump? Why was that? Or is it simply that it had nothing to do with values, and this is just the rise of demagoguery in the West? We're seeing this in France with Marine Le Pen. We're seeing this in the Netherlands with Geert Wilders.
I think
Is it really anti-establishmentarianism, or is it just the rise of demagoguery and maybe even racial supremacy?
There is definitely a rise in the, I would say, far right. I mean, there's a movement going on that's happening. I mean, if you look at the Brexit, a few weeks before the Brexit results came out, there was a shooting, of the Cox, the MP who was shot. And even that didn't that incident didn't prevent people from voting, moving out of the European Union. And I think even for Hillary Clinton, I think she didn't have that, although the media did project, some of the Western media did project that she would make it. But actually the Americans, they wanted some sort of a change in their policy, for example, policy of the foreign policy, especially of their foreign policy towards towards Syria, Professor, as well as the other countries.
Professor Vijay Singh, I'll ask you this question. You a former leader of the Liberal Party. Is liberalism dying as populism? Maybe even we've seen even in Germany, neo-Nazism is on the rise.
Well, part of the problem is people have very different views of what liberalism is. And liberalism to me is very much what Gladstone said. There have been various strands of liberalism, but the dominant strand of liberalism to me is Gladstone. Gladstone, the person who would have told Hillary Clinton, you made a desert and called it peace.
All right, let's talk in terms of liberal democracy.
No, I'm sorry.
Harinder was saying that liberal democracy is dying.
Liberalism is about freedom. And Gladstone said very simply, he would always be on the side of the masses against the classes. Now, I think this is what you've seen both with regard to Brexit and with regard to Donald Trump. Because there has become an elitist view of the dominant politicians in the world, who, for reasons that Harinder made very clear in I thought, a brilliant presentation, what you said, about how democracy was captured by an elite, who then basically said, if you don't vote the way we tell you to vote, you're not being democratic, like Jayanta Dhanapala. Donald Trump is not democracy. But Gladstone always pointed out that ultimately you have to serve the people. So liberalism in the original sense, I think, will always continue because it is about individuality, about freedom, about the people. Neoliberalism is quite a different kettle of fish. And the really sad thing about Obama and Clinton is that being Democrats, they were more neoliberal. And let me tell you, if I may answer the question you put to Asanga, you see there, what I think people can't stand is hypocrisy. Asanga used the word duplicity. I'd be strong, Harinder, I'd say hypocrisy. Donald Trump is a businessman. He makes his money the way businessmen do, which is perhaps the reason you and I would never make successful businessmen. But having said that, Hillary Clinton made masses of money by commandeering the state, the foundation. She sold America in order to get money from all sorts of dictatorships. The evidence is very clear. She used I won't say tax evasion. You know, many people use tax evasion. You and I may happen to think one shouldn't. But Hillary Clinton actually did it in spades. I mean, the Clinton Foundation
Professor Vijay
paid
Singh,
a hell of a lot of money.
It seems to me
So
that
the point
both
I'm trying to
Asanga
make-
and you have conveniently not addressed the what I raised. Is this the rise of demagoguery and neo-Nazism
No, I
and some kind of
absolutely
supremacy
said
in the
nothing
West?
of the sort, for the very simple reason that in these other places, you will find that the demagogues only get up to a certain percentage. When they start crossing that threshold, they are co-opting ordinary people, and their message will change, which is why Marine Le Pen is very different from her father. I mean, I will probably never vote for her, but my God, if I had Sarkozy to choose between her, Sarkozy and Marine Le Pen, and that wimp François Hollande, I'd probably not want to vote. I mean, in this case, I can't say Donald Trump was ideal, but I would certainly have chosen him on top of Hillary Clinton, because the woman is a liar and a cheat and a crook, and she pretends to be a saint. That's what I can't stand. You know, we have a lot of politicians who are obviously going to cut corners in their way to power. That's why people who don't cut corners never succeed in politics. But having said that, I think the way she milked the system and was self-righteous about it is precisely what was wrong. And if you go back to the point I made, Donald Trump won the nomination of a major political party, one of two major political parties. And in order to do that, you had to adjust. And I think after the election, he has behaved without any triumphalism. You know, at Hillary once, she would have ground him into the dust. He had been particularly kind to Dorian Gray Obama. You know, he went and saw him and said, you know, there are some good points here, which I thought was rather sweet of him.
Dr. Harvinder, sorry to cut in. Do you think the Syrian war will come to an end? Because just last week, Donald Trump hinted to the Wall Street Journal that he might pull out all support that is given to the moderate rebels, and he will support Russia and Assad. Do you think we can see an end to this war?
No, definitely not. The Syrian war has become too far complicated. I mean, irrespective of whether Donald Trump or Hillary is in power. I mean, if Hillary Clinton would have come, that would have been a very different equation, because she would have, her idea was enforcement of a no-fly zone over Aleppo and all. That would have directly conflicted American forces with the Russian bombers, would have kind of created, some people argue, would have created the Third World War, but no, because the reason is the Syrian conflict has kind of spiraled out of control of all the key players. If you look at the way it is, for example, if you have the battle for Aleppo and then looking at how all these groups are kind of realigning, and I just saw certain reports saying how the recent attacks were led actually by ISIS, not by any other group, and all the Jabhat al-Nusra, they were all following with ISIS. So in a way, irrespective of what, you know, the outcome of the American presidential election, I don't think that.
But are you not contradicting yourself now, Dr. Vidanagi? You first initially say that the president can take a decision.
Yes.
He could take a decision and he could exercise it.
Yeah.
Now you say that he wouldn't do it.
No, I'm
He
saying
made a promise and a
irrespective of what
pledge.
he does, whether he pulls out American special operators or American advisors from Syria, pulls out some of the support America is giving to the rebels, and the Americans, and if you, I don't know if you were following the Syrian case in the last few months, the Americans themselves were kind of confused on who to provide military or financial aid.
Confused or hypocritical?
Well, either way, I think they were confused. I mean, after a while, they thought they could.
But things could change after Trump's election on the 20th of January, when he takes oaths. He could do something. He could do something different. He could bring in that change that the world needed.
Well, I don't know, because the way they have been dealing with Syria has been. There is no clear policy as far as I can see. I don't think the Syrian war
Many
would come to
mistakes
an
were
end.
made over the last few years. Let's take Libya for an example. You saw Colonel Muammar Gaddafi being killed by NATO forces in broad daylight. You saw what happened in Tunisia. You saw what happened in Egypt. You saw many incidents of this sort. You saw what happened in Iraq, for an example. You saw the British Prime Minister, former British Prime Minister, saying that he made a mistake after the Iraqi president was hanged by the American courts. So you see a lot of problems that plagued the world over the last few years, last few decades. Do you see that something would change in the next few years, the next few months, the way the thinking would be incorporated?
If you're focusing on the Middle East, I don't think so, because I don't think the conflicts that have begun in the Middle East would just go away. So, because North and South Iraq are two different countries. Syria is no more. The reality of Syria, it would never be the same Syria that we had come to know. So the conflict in Syria would carry on, and the problem with.
So you're saying that there won't be any change in the thinking?
No, I'm not. I'm telling you, there won't be any change on the ground because the battle.
So where will be where can you see the change if that's the case?
Well, the Americans are too. See, Obama wanted to pull out of Iraq. His pledge in 2008 was, "I'm going to pull the troops out." He never. He made a surge, and now the way the U.S. is fighting wars, right? That's why I said about Obama earlier. Obama has committed more troops and more advisors. I don't know whether you hear this term. There is no more American troops. There are American military contractors or advisors. There are 7-to-1 advisors in Iraq. If there are 10,000 American troops, there are 70,000 American advisors. These are all private corporations who are fighting for the United States or providing special skills. So that's why I said Obama started this. Obama he created JSOC, right? Joint Special Operations Command, which came under him. So he could go to war in any part of the world.
Let me correct you there, Dr. Vidanage. There was a U.S. troop withdrawal in 2011.
Yeah, when Obama came to power, after he made a surge, then he withdrew. Now he's putting back. If you look at the Mosul battle, look at the numbers. If you look at the battles for Fallujah, if you look at the battles for all the southern and the northern states in Iraq, if you look at the number of American advisors, they're increasing. But they're not American troops. They're called American advisors. If you look at military, they're called American military advisors. That's American private military contractors who are fighting for the State Department, for Pentagon, on behalf of the Iraqi government in Syria against.
So why have Donald Trump if that's the case? If there's not going to be any change, why have Donald Trump there? To do what?
Well, I don't think it was just the Middle East. Donald Trump was the problem. What Professor Rajiv was trying, the whole idea of the kind of liberal elitism. It's not just the Middle East. There were so many domestic issues that these people did not address. Let me just give you one. Donald Trump's key strategist Bannon, in an interview a few months before, said the American globalists had gutted the American middle class and created the Asian. The American globalists have gutted the American working class and have created an Asian middle class. So the critique against Obama, Hillary Clinton, the traditional Republicans was that they were too global focused. They were too focused on fixing problems of democracy in the Middle East, fixing issues in Estonia, containing Russia. Meanwhile, the American working class, the American people were losing out. They were trying to create global climate change deals while shutting American coal power plants. For example, West Virginia, that's where Donald Trump got the largest vote in the primary. 77% of West Virginians voted for Donald Trump. West Virginia is traditionally a democratic heartland.
77% of West Virginian Republicans
in the primary. Well, that was the highest.
77% of West
not West Virginians, of Republicans. Because of the coal industry, right? 144 coal plants.
That's another thing, all right? Let's talk about this in the context of Sri Lanka.
Yeah.
Now, one of the main, let's say, pet projects for President Maithripala Sirisena is tackling climate change and environmental degradation. You have now the leader of the free world who says that climate change is a hoax perpetrated by China. So where does this place Sri Lanka in terms of cooperating with the US in climate change deals? Donald Trump is saying he's going to go look at the Paris Agreement. He's not very happy with it.
Asang, you can answer that question.
Where does this leave Sri Lanka, Asang?
Well, I think we'd have to wait and see for the new set of ideas to, whatever said in the political platform, how it will sort of unfold in the next couple of months, especially how Donald Trump would see aggressiveness of Russia, the South China issues, the Middle East issue, as well as the climate change on COP21, what sort of position he would take. It's clear that he mentioned in his campaign, but how will it unfold in the next, I mean, we'll have to wait and see how it will. So there's a lot of people say he's unpredictable. And
when you say how it will unfold, he's already said that it's a hoax. He doesn't believe that it's happening.
He said many
or
things.
at least he doesn't think that human activity is contributing to global warming. So there's nothing to unfold there. He's already stated his position, and he's pretty clear on that. So where does it leave Sri Lanka in our fight against climate change? We've seen in Sri Lanka over the past couple of years, the Minister for Disaster Management revealed recently that the damage from landslides for 2016 is going into several billion rupees. I think it was close to around 10 billion rupees. The damage from landslides for 2016 is estimated at 10 billion rupees. This is happening increasingly in Sri Lanka. We're seeing this with the flooding. We're seeing the change in rain patterns, which is devastating farming in Sri Lanka. So we are a country that is seeing the very real effects of climate change. We have now a government that has sort of reoriented its foreign policy, where they've been forced to bring in China once again because of the economic fallback of reorienting their foreign policy. But where does this leave us now? We've reoriented towards the West, and the West is now full of people who are saying that climate change is a hoax.
I think the position the new government has taken is very clear, and it's correct, because it's a perfect balance that President Sirisena wished to have between the West as well as the rest of the world, and he has actually managed it quite well with the 22 months, and you could see that what he has clearly spelled is an Asia-centric balanced foreign policy. And whatever said, on the COP21 as well as the pledges that he had given on the climate change, it stays as it is as a nation, because that's what we believe, and that's what we really think. These are the things that, because we are affected, like you said, of the climate change so much as an island. I mean, these big powers are, sort of destroying the environment, and we are getting the sort of consequence of that. So we have taken our position, and we are. I think we, as a nation, we are happy about it.
Just given the changes that we're seeing around the world today in Western politics, in Eastern politics, do you think it's finally time for Sri Lanka to get a white paper on foreign policy?
Well,
something that should have been done a long time ago.
It was time 10 years ago. But I have to say, Nadeem, you sound very much like Mangala Samarira, which I think is a terrible thing to say to anybody, and I'm sorry. But you asked Asanga whether our climate change policy should depend on the West. And Asanga made a very clear answer that we have to deal with climate change, with environmental damage ourselves, regardless of what the West says. We are not slaves to the West.
No, you misunderstood. What I was saying is, in an era where the West is denying climate change, and the Chinese are now, at present, actively taking on climate change, is it right that as a country that is facing the effects of climate change, that we are aligned with Western policies?
Nadeem, your conditions are irrelevant. As a country that's facing the effects of climate change or environmental change or whatever, of course we have to act, and it's a pity we didn't act. And whether Trump or Clinton or Obama or anybody says A or B or C, the simple fact is, if our people suffer from landslides and floods and so on, we should. When I was advised on reconciliation, I used to keep writing to the president. He ignored everything I said, your biggest problem is water. You have to have a national water policy. We can't be coping with floods and droughts all the time.
With all due respect to you, I would request you not to make any remark to the journalists who are here saying that they sound like him, they sound like her, because we give you the due respect as well. I do not say in any way that you sound like someone else, or
My
I do
dear,
not make any
you can tell me anything that you like, and I
really
reserve the right to freedom of speech,
obviously you
and I will continue to use freedom of speech, and you can, if you want to guard yourself and not
I am telling you,
comment.
In this particular show, with all due respect, there are the gentlemen who are on the show, you have to ensure that you don't make any inclination to my journalists saying that they sound like
Mr.
They sound like that.
You sound like Mr.
Thank you very much,
right?
Professor. We're going for a short commercial break. When we come back, it's Face the Nation. We're talking about the impact on Sri Lanka. Donald J. Trump's appointment, how is it going to affect the subcontinent? How is it going to affect a country like Sri Lanka? All this and more after the short commercial break. Second, I can stay with Face the Nation. Welcome back. This is Face the Nation. Our topic of discussion today is foreign policy and where is the world heading. Let's focus our attention to Asanga Abegunasekara, Director General, Institute of National Security Studies, Sri Lanka. Asanga, interestingly, during the election campaign, Donald Trump made several pledges. Key among them were a complete ban on Muslims entering the country until the law enforcement authorities in the United States sort themselves out, know the root causes on what exactly is taking place. And the second one was building a wall in Mexico, and Mexico is going to fund this particular wall in question. Now, will all this be done? Is it all realistic? Can he do it? Or has he got a cue from Sri Lankan politicians? Make pledges and not do it?
Well, this is a hard line, positions he took. And I think the reason he took these positions was to protect, always giving a message saying that I'm protecting the country, I'm protecting all of you. And if we look at the xenophobia, that was like a key theme that he created. It's something like a new beginning which he wanted to sort of, that's the feeling that he set. And like I said before, so we need to see how it unfolds. I mean, all these pledges and promises that he makes. I mean, he's got the Attorney General now appointed, the new Attorney General. I mean, he's also a strong critique on the immigration laws, and which you can see. I would say, the new Attorney General being there, I think, who has been a strong critique on immigration, he would implement up to a certain limit. I mean, I don't see all of the election pledges coming, unfolding, as well as, delivering everything 100%. I don't think that is, because there will be, the American system is such that you have the institutions as well as the Congress, as well as various other things that you needs to sort of get blessings from. So I don't think, all that whatever he said in the election campaign can, come into reality.
Just a week after his appointment as a US president, he said that to BBC, he was not referring to a complete wall per se, it was just a partial wall that he was referring to. How do you view the statements made by Donald Trump? He changes his stand every 24 hours or so. Why?
I think because...
Is it presidential?
I think, both the candidates, how I looked at it was when these questions were asked before the elections, I said, Trump was a better choice than Hillary, because I think Trump would look at Sri Lanka's position, what we are going through, the challenges we are going through, in a different way. Because Hillary would continue the same pivot to Asia, which is continued by Obama. In the same way, and the duplicity that is happening, all the double standards that they have taken would change, and that's what the world wants. What the world wants is the double standards of the United States to change. You can't treat one bombing as collateral damage and the other bombing as human rights violation. So that's
Donald Trump is sure a patriot, isn't he?
He is. He did.
So he managed
to create that image, as well as he won that. He won the popular vote for that. I think of protecting the inward values. But in a world that we live, the inward values is not. It's not the only case. We need to look at the outward. As a nation, Sri Lanka would need to take. We need to look at in an outward way also. I go back to the Kumaratunga Munidasa's time of. What he said in 1931, saying that protecting your own language, your inward values, and nationalism is also important, but learning other languages like Sanskrit, other things, and valuing other things are also important. And this is coming from our thinkers in 1930, but unfortunately our political establishment from 1948 has failed to sort of grab this. We are a bit afraid of getting outward stuff, into the country. And that's the fear that Kumaratunga Munidasa also
Is Trump a good
highlighted.
option or a bad option?
Well, we'll have to see, because how he, I mean, like you said, I mean, he's changing his positions of the political promises. So we see how he'll progress. I mean, he probably could come as an president who, I mean, create iconic decisions. I mean, especially ending the war in Syria. I mean, he probably would work with Putin in a closer manner than Obama.
So ending the war in Syria, you think that's a possibility? However, Dr. Vidanage says no.
I mean, these things could happen. I mean, if it happens, it's good for the people of Syria. That's
is it going to happen
saying.
or is it not going to happen? How do you view this? It's a very
He will
hypothetical
work
question.
closely with Putin. I see a lot of, I mean, from his statements as well as everything what you've mentioned, I think there'll be a very strong relationship with Russia, and that's going to happen. As well as with China, I see a positive trajectory with China than India. I don't see a positive trajectory towards India or strategic relationship what Obama built. So I think there will be changes.
It's similar
in his
to what we experienced in Sri Lanka a few years ago, selecting the countries that we are going to work with, isn't it?
Well, I think we need to work with everyone because we have to keep an equidistant foreign policy.
No, I'm talking about Trump, not about us.
We'll have to see, I mean, how...
No,
we
my
sort
question to you is very simple. A few years ago,
yeah.
our country's leadership also selected a few countries to work with and ignored the rest. Is it a similar approach that Trump is going to take? You'll have to wait and see.
This is because this is what he said. So, like he said, I mean, he's changing his position also. So it's quite hard to predict right now.
Thank you very much, Asanga Vigunasekara, for expressing your thoughts. And now we move to Professor Rajiv Jayasinghe, former Member of Parliament and also the former leader of the Liberal Party. Dr. Jayasinghe, interestingly, Trump makes a very interesting remark, and he wants a special prosecutor for Clinton on the email controversy. Now, we saw similar statements being expressed in Sri Lanka as well. Special courts, an expedited process to investigate corruption malpractices that took place. Given your experience, do you think that Trump would really go ahead and appoint a special prosecutor?
I think, let me go back to what you said earlier, which I disagree with. You said Sri Lanka made a choice to pick particular countries. I think the opposite happened. We were unpicked. Sri Lanka had a very good relationship with the United States up to 2008, and then that changed because we knew that the Americans were gunning for us and gunning for us hypocritically. And, you know, as the American ambassador told Tamara, we'll get you next time. I don't think Mahinda Rajapaksa wanted to go only for China.
Professor Rajiv Jayasinghe, on this very show, when I asked you a question about what went wrong as far as Sri Lanka was concerned, you said very simply, President Mahinda Rajapaksa lost the faith of the international community.
No, what I said was that because he reacted adversely to the Americans, then people started going with all their eggs. And what I particularly was critical about was his failure to make up with India, because India had stayed loyal to us, if you remember.
And then you said
India
that this is why you supported President Maithripala Sirisena's candidature.
Because, as I said, Mahinda Rajapaksa reacted adversely, and I've said that. But Mahinda Rajapaksa's reaction, which was fueled by the lunacy he made of the foreign ministry, because, you know, we had no...
So there was a mistake on the part of the former president.
Of course it was. The foreign ministry was a mess then, and I've said that. But the initial reaction was President Rajapaksa was because he was rejected by the Americans who had stood by him. And as I said, Robert Blake made that very clear. So then the reaction was to put all your eggs in the China basket, and that was emphatically a mistake because it was a mistake to turn your back on India. Now the present government was doing exactly the same thing until they realized the West had nothing to offer and they realized they had to go back
Trump
to China.
calling for a special prosecutor for Clinton.
To your special thing, I think the very simple point is Trump was trying to highlight again and again the fact that Clinton had done something wrong. She kept lying about it, all that came out. I think what he needs to do is to make sure that justice is done. And what I think will happen is that we will now have more and more evidence emerging of a lot of bad behavior and bad faith on the part of Hillary Clinton. It won't need a special prosecutor. I go back to what I advised the present government when, as you know, Vasan Senaka were the only ones who came out idealistically against President Rajapaksa. And I said at the time, don't persecute, have a Freedom of Information Act, make all assets declarations public, allow them to be challenged, and if people return the money that they have made improperly, allow an amnesty. Don't go for persecution. I continue to say that I don't think you need to get revenge on people, but you must show the world exactly how they have taken advantage of their positions to make money, or in Hillary Clinton's case, to completely abuse the laws. You don't need to put her in jail, but you have to make sure that this doesn't happen again.
The funding for Clinton's campaign came from many countries which supported ISIS. How do you view this, Dr. Vijay?
Well, I go back to what I said before, that Hillary Clinton created ISIS. You see, they're ignoring what I call the moderate Muslims. You know, because don't forget that the Islam
I want to ask you a very direct question, Professor Vijay. Who created the ISIS? Who created ISIS? Is it
Hillary Clinton supported forces against moderate Muslim leaders, and anyone could have said, maybe she didn't argue it through, but anyone could have said that the people who will fill the vacuum are the extremists. This was added to by the fact that her allies had absolutely no compunction about supporting those extremists, because we know perfectly well, as you go back to 2011, the lot of the madrasas follow a form of extreme anti-Shia, anti-Western, Wahhabi-type extremism, and these countries which have never denied that particular approach to Islam, which is not the mainstream Islam, which is a much more moderate and civilized religion, such people were amongst her strongest backers. And Hillary Clinton made no bones about accepting money from them. She made no bones about trying to get rid of people like Assad, just as she got rid of Gaddafi, and they have created mayhem and misery in those places. To go back to Iran, I do hope Donald Trump realizes, and because he's a pragmatic man, he'll realize that his best asset against the fundamentalism of ISIS is countries like Iran.
Thank you very much, Professor Rajiv Vijay Singh, a former Member of Parliament as well as the former leader of the Liberal Party. We now focus our attention to Dr. Harinder Vidanage, Director, Bandaranaike Center for International Studies. Harinder, interestingly, what is taking place right now in the United States post-election is very troublesome. You see on Facebook, you see in social media, where is the country really sliding back to? This is a country that boasts about democracy, boasts about harmony among different ethnicities. What is happening right now? Now, you've been in the US for 5 years, that's what you said initially. How do you view all this post-election?
Yeah, I'll go back to the question that I couldn't finish, and I'll come back, was Syria, because there we had this conversation. The last thing the US current new president wants is for the Russians to take the credit in winning a war against ISIS. So that would not happen. So that would not happen. That's what I'm trying to say. And if you are against the Iranians, and that is because ISIS is a creation of both internal factors in Iraq and Syria, as well as external regional power struggle between Turkey, Iran, and Saudi Arabia. So that equation would not change. And of course,
so there is no US in this equation.
Well, the US is there, but I'm saying even if, as you said, if Trump makes a different decision, that equation won't change.
So are you in agreement with Professor Vijay Singh about Hillary Clinton creating ISIS, being one of the people behind creating ISIS?
I don't think you can narrow it down like that. I mean, of course, that's an argument you can make. But ISIS was a result of two things. One, of course, de-Baathification after after Saddam Hussein's party was ousted, and the massive support the Americans gave to the Maliki government.
Harinder, I'm just going to stop the timer for a minute here, and I want to get the reaction from Professor Vijay Singh. Are you in agreement with what Harinder is saying on this?
Well, Harinder is always very circumspect and polite, but the simple fact is it was American actions that encouraged the development of extremists. As Harinder said, it started before Hillary Clinton became Secretary of State under Bush, but the more deliberate use of them to topple even the government in Syria was directly a result of Hillary Clinton, just as the use of extremists in Libya, and I read recently that Obama was against it, was also a Clinton. So that I believe very strongly that the American establishment created ISIS, if they had any intelligence, and I'm sure they do, they would have realized that this was the inevitable consequence of pulling the plug on moderate states. The extremists would take over, and they had no compunction whatsoever about this.
Yes, Dr. Vidyanathan, you can continue.
So as far as ISIS goes, it's a more complicated story. So I don't want to go there. I don't think that's not your question was about the United States. So yes, Asanga was talking about 1931 and Kumartunga Munidasa, and 1931 was the year the Americans got the American dream. Right, Rousseau came out with that, in the book and the article, The American Dream, which the American dream was that anybody can come and fulfill, grow, expand, and live the life they want. And of course, so that was the whole idea, right? So that was the idea. That's why America called themselves so special, exceptional, right? The beacon on the hill. The fact that it is a country for anybody.
We saw racial violence in even during the early 1960s.
I'm trying to get there.
Yes.
So that was the whole narrative. That was the secret of success of brand America. You call that's the brand America. So what has happened in the last 20-30 years is the fact that a culmination of many forces, the massive disenchantment of public against establishments, poverty among both white and black working classes. Right, I mean, you saw this starting in 2014 with Missouri, Ferguson, with the increasing of violence against police violence, the militarization of police, increasing of surveillance. So, last year you had this the movie of Captain America: Civil War. I was telling my students in the U.S., you will get your Civil War soon because the second Civil War is coming. Of course, I mean I was kind of joking, but it seems though that way because post-election violence, why is that? Well, there's a reason, of course, because the election was driven by fear and anger, and Trump and Hillary Clinton both addressed that. They didn't try to kind of bring it down. They kind of kept on using that anger against others, anger against minorities, anger against Muslims, against gays, lesbians. People who ran the show for Trump said, the cities which voted for Hillary Clinton are run, those are metrosexual hubs. But rest of America is very different. It's very conservative. It's very right-wing Christian. It's evangelical. So. And now we are seeing the fault lines opening up. The Bible Belt, the Rust Belt. When people are out of jobs, when there is significant unemployment, when there is significant violence in certain areas, and then significant fear created by politicians, that idea of demagoguery you were talking about terrorism, about Muslims coming in, about refugees. So it's creating a culture of fear and resentment, which is driving this kind of violence. Of course, you had the Ku Klux Klan, having a march celebrating the victory of Trump. Trump may or may not endorse it, but you see a return of those movements which were very active before the civil rights movement, which kind of was cut down. But now you're seeing a return of those.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Harin Vidyanathan, Director, Bandaranaike Center for International Studies. I open the floor for questions. Let's start off with Faraz.
Thank you. I think I'll ask this from Dr. Vidyanathan, please. Donald Trump, no public role before, no experience, and he's going to run America. How's he going to do? Does he know what to do?
Well, I think he'll rely a lot on his team and a lot on his vice president, who was a former governor. So we'll have for the first time in history of the US presidency a president who's very reliant on his VP. I mean, of course Cheney had a voice, there were a few other presidents. So he will rely on the insiders, but there again there is a problem because the Republican Party has a strong establishment presence. They have, what you saw in the last few days, the whole transition team, the early names that came up got pushed away. So it's called a bi-coastal purge because the coast has the political elites, the two coasts, East and West, and they were kind of significantly powerful. But I think Trump is trying to contain them by having people like Bannon being appointed. But at the same time, he's balancing off with pre-births. He might have a few more establishment veterans coming in. So he'll rely a lot on his team to run the country. the problem with Trump is the fact that towards the end, latter side of the campaign, even his Twitter handle was taken away from him by his campaign manager because he was being a bit too rash on it. He was out of control. So that's why Obama said, how can you trust a person who can't even, who has no control over your Twitter? So that means to a certain extent, Trump has to kind of accept the reality that he has to run with the team.
No, but I think Faraz's question is very direct and basic. Can a businessman run the show?
Of course why not? Why not? America was built by businessmen. I mean, if you look at the United Nations, when the UN was established, there was no place to set up the UN HQ. It was Rockefeller who gave the land. That's Rockefeller land. Otherwise, they were in a high school somewhere in Bronx, the United Nations. A lot of people don't know it. So Americans strongly believe businessmen can get the job done, because that's the American. Because if you look at what's America is built on branding. It's built on entrepreneurship. Everything we know, all the brands we like, they're all American brands. Why? Because that is the whole idea of entrepreneurship. So that's why if you listen to people when they were talking about Trump, they were so excited. Oh yeah, finally we are getting a businessman. Somebody who knows how to run this country.
Faraz, quite interesting remarks made by Vidhanageb. Sri Lanka needs businessmen too?
Whilst you were saying that, I was wondering who, because it's obviously the time is now almost nigh for the Sri Lankan public to turn to the private sector. And one wonders whether there is such a person in Sri Lanka.
My worry is if we try to start always kind of paralleling the United States with Sri Lanka, that's a different. Sometimes you can't make those parallels. I mean, the way the US was built up, set up, and the way Sri Lanka. I mean, you can't. A businessman or a woman can be successful in the US. That doesn't mean Sri Lanka should also go for a businessman all of a sudden. Of course, you can come from a business elite into politics. That has happened globally.
Doesn't this really mean what the American people have really said is that they are fed up with the lies of the politicians? The politicians haven't delivered, so they've had to turn to the private sector.
Yeah, there was they believed. That's why Hillary Clinton was a bad choice for the Democrats. The people strongly believed. Even the Democrats, you can't trust her.
So in Sri Lanka we have a similar situation where the people are not getting delivery. They're getting a lot of promises but no delivery. All sorts of cases, and of course the bond is one such matter, and everyone's holding their heads now. But it is the single most significant matter that this government has had to cope. Borrowings are up by 23%, no new projects, nothing. So the people are obviously fed up. They were fed up with one lot, and they got a new lot in, and they're back in the same boat.
For us, the state has always been entrepreneurial. That's something we are missing. Every successful state had been successful because they were entrepreneurial states. If you look at the United States, it's an epitome of entrepreneurship. That's why,
So how would you then compare, what have we had in Sri Lanka?
Well, I think Sri Lanka's state building is very different to the state building of the United States, right? From our colonial heritage, the way we inherited institutions, the way the political elite that took over, that's a different conversation. But what I'm trying to say is the idea of entrepreneurship, the idea that a state can be entrepreneurial and is entrepreneurial. All the businesses that the main countries have come up.
They're entrepreneurial here, but they're only entrepreneurial for their own benefit.
Well, that's a critique we can bring out. But I think if we kind of go down that route, I mean, I don't think we can fix things. I mean, of course, we are very critical of so many things that our government, our state is going through. But I mean, there is a limit of criticism as well. There's a limit of critique. But I think the fact that the country lacks entrepreneurship at all levels. The country lacks innovation at all levels, and it lacks empowering people at all levels, right? So the country, if you're talking about a Sri Lankan political state reconfiguration, I don't think this is the forum. I'm not qualified even to do that. I'm an international relations expert. I'm not but of course it ties with the question. But as Sri Lanka has its problem, yes, I agree. right? I don't know how to. I don't know how to fix it. But of course, we should encourage some kind of. I think we should also think about, if you are taking a parallel to the United States, the U.S. success was always on entrepreneurship. That's the model India has employed. That's the model now China is employing.
I'm finding it difficult to buy what you're saying. You say that you're an international expert, and then you're saying you don't know how to fix the problem in Sri Lanka because you are an international expert. So you don't know what the solution is for Sri Lanka. Is that what Dr. Vidanand you're trying?
No, I'm not trying to say that. I'm not trying to say I will have, a country's governance is a complex process. If somebody says I have a fix for it, well, you should get that person to this country, and that's not the conversation. Of course, I mean there are always people could contribute in certain ways, but I don't think, and I don't think you should as kind of think there is an ideal state as well. No state, no country was ideal. There was no, so that we shouldn't get into that, black or white. But of course, Sri Lanka should, I think I agree with, I have seen what Faraz is trying to say, the idea of the limits of problems that we have. There should be a limit. There should be kind of a, different way of thinking.
I think what I'm really saying is that, I think what I was trying to draw a parallel is not with Mr. Trump or with our leaders, but with the people of the United States and the people of Sri Lanka. They both seem to be suffering from the same problem, under delivery. They want delivery.
I think that's not just Sri Lanka and the US. I think if you're looking at the world,
which is why it's a telling indictment on all politicians of the democratic
It is. I agree with you totally on that. From 2014 onwards, 2014 had the largest number of democratic elections in recent history. 50 countries had elections. And going towards next year, everybody is discounted with politicians. Everybody is discounted with the democratic institutions. Of course, that means it's a telling reminder that we need a reset at some point.
Professor, what are your thoughts on the question posed by Faraz? Only promises.
The original question. I think the problem is that Sri Lanka doesn't have a real business tradition, partly because of the way we emerged from colonialism and because of the great role of the state, unlike in America, the Sri Lanka business community has always been rent-seeking. Take Maharajas. It's been a wonderful organization, but a lot of people believe that it really made its name because of patronage from Mr. Premadasa. Whether or not that's correct, I don't know. I think there are a lot of groups that have that way of, I would not call it rent-seeking, but you have to take advantage of the politicians. So you don't really have independent businessmen of the sort Donald Trump was. That's one factor. The second factor is that I think people are certainly very, very tired of politicians, but also Sri Lanka's political system, especially given the gross betrayal by the Prime Minister of the commitment to change the electoral system, is essentially another exercise in domination by establishments. The whole system of district-based PR actually doesn't allow for individuals to emerge. You have to be part of a team, and that means you have to compromise. So I think that for Sri Lanka, really the only hope for great change, we had great hopes in the case of President Maithripala Sirisena, who wasn't a traditional politician. Unfortunately, the circumstance of the election meant that he was trapped within the UNP. I think he's trying to get away from that, and Faraz, as you said, the bond was, I think, his liberation, because he suddenly realized if he did not stand firm for the values he had asserted, he would be completely drowned. And I hope he uses things like the bond and the other evidence of massive corruption within the UNP to escape this burden. But I think, given that he has said he will not stand for the presidency, perhaps we should be looking forward to someone who is not entrapped in this terrible political, let us say, straitjacketing that our system has imposed on everyone. Quite unlike the Indian, as Harindra also said. India had a more entrepreneurial tradition, perhaps because it was not so closely statist dominated.
Professor Vijay
just give me a second, Zulfiq. While respecting the thoughts made by Professor Rajiv Vijay Singh about the Maharaja organization, trying to get attention through Ranasinghe Premadasa, I want to remind our viewers who are watching us tonight, we established operations in 1936, and since then Maharaja organization ventured into many areas of business. We took over A.F. Jones in 1964, which was one of the oldest tea companies in Sri Lanka. We established the first PVC pipes in Sri Lanka. Then we went ahead and built the first flour mill in Sri Lanka in the Eastern Province. Then we started building the first dam in Sri Lanka under the patronage of the then Gamil Sanayaka. We were able to build all this without any politician, standing alone, which was the determination of one single man. He is the chairman of the organization, and his vision has been embroiled throughout the organization, and that's what we've done. We have been able to show our prowess in tea, PVC pipes, and also media, and that is why there was a change in Sri Lanka prior to the 8th of January 2015 polls.
Perfect. Professor Vijay Singh, my question to you is, now under the Obama administration, during that time, like you said, the US was gunning for us, and we had resolutions at the UNHRC as well. And then with the change in the Sri Lankan government, we had people like Nisha Desai Biswal coming in, praising the progress in Sri Lanka. Now this is all under the Obama administration. Now with the newly elected US President, Mr. Donald Trump, what does this government have to do?
Well, the first thing
does it have to go for more lobbying with the US?
Well, what the government should realize, and I'm afraid I don't think that our foreign minister at the moment is capable of it, which is why your idea of a white paper is excellent. I think the problem is that you cannot expect America to deliver. America wanted to get rid of the Rajapaksas and did everything possible to ensure that happened. But as you can see, even after it got rid of the Rajapaksas, we were still left on the hook, partly because Mangala Samaringa just sold the pass at Geneva, when he could have had a much better resolution. And the result is massive campaigning, and you know perfectly well that Sivaji was dashing coconuts to get Hillary elected, because they assumed, I think rightly, that if Hillary were elected, she'd go hell for leather on behalf of the TGT, and not all the bleating of Mangala and Ranil would have saved us. Because as you know, Americans may love Ranil as he believes, but they love money more, and Hillary was being funded by these guys. Now the very simple fact is that in these years, the Americans didn't deliver. For instance, there was supposed to be a massive project to help us in vocational training. And, it was awarded to a contractor. And then suddenly 4 months ago, they said, no, I'm sorry, we're cancelling the whole project. So the money that even had been pledged was being withdrawn as America realized it had other priorities. And it's still not coming back. I mean, the Americans have behaved disgraceful to this government, despite which Mangala still goes bleating to them. And actually, the temerity to say he would have preferred Hillary to have been elected. So I think what this result, shows is, one, Sri Lanka must stand on its own 2 feet. It should immediately appoint a foreign minister who is able to deal with the world independently and not in a sycophantic manner. And it should calibrate its foreign policy, A, to recognize the centrality, which is in the President's manifesto, that Asia was to be central. And his manifesto was completely ignored by Mangala and Ranil, who went bleating after the West, which let them down like a ton of bricks. So I think the President was right, go for Asia first, but that doesn't mean alienating other people. It means keeping on good relations with everyone, as was pointed out earlier. Mahinda Rajapaksa ended up, although I think he was right to appreciate the good deed China did for us, he shouldn't have alienated other people. That is where you need an expert diplomatic foreign minister. And I hope very much that Maithripala Sirisena, just as he stood firm against Arjuna Mahendran, will stand firm about this appalling foreign ministry at the moment and get us a good, decent man who can deal with the world properly.
Asanga, you're with the Institute of National Security Studies, Sri Lanka. Following the election of Trump, we've seen, like Dr. Harinder was saying, the rise of groups like the KKK, the neo-Nazis, the so-called alt-right, although I don't believe that the so-called alt-right. Now there's a sizable Sri Lankan population living in the United States. We have many dual citizens as well. What should Sri Lanka's policy, our foreign mission in Washington, what policy should they take with regard to these groups which have been labeled hate groups? And do you think that we should, given the anti-South Asian rhetoric that is being put out, the anti-immigrant rhetoric that is being put out by these groups, do you think that we should fear for the safety of Sri Lankan citizens or Sri Lankan dual citizens who are currently residing in the United States?
I think what will happen right now, I think after the election.
We've already seen attacks happening. Fortunately, there have been no attacks targeting people of Sri Lankan descent, not that we know of. There have already been attacks against minority groups in the United States. Should we fear for the safety of Sri Lankan citizens living there?
No, I mean, that's definitely a concern of the government. I mean, to protect our overseas Sri Lankans, and that's a concern that we should have as a nation. But what we'll see right now after the election, the post-election, is a sort of a copycat syndrome, which is like you will see Donald Trump's victory, world leaders or the governments trying to import certain sort of the victory that has come up in the United States, and they try to import this to their own countries and sort of a copycatting it. You'll see in France, you'll see in other countries and various other places. But we shouldn't get trapped to this whole copycat syndrome, and because we have our own values and we have our own ways of doing things, and we should appreciate that, and as a nation. And I mean, if what Harendra said earlier on the improving on entrepreneurship and all that, because we have 1 million three-wheel drivers, and look what we have done. I mean, we have not paid enough attention of creating an entrepreneurial environment in Sri Lanka, because where is our manpower? Do we have
you didn't answer my initial question. Should we fear for the safety of Sri Lankan citizens?
Yeah, that's what I did.
Is it a yes or a no?
Yes, of course, yes. That's I answered
their
it.
safety.
Yes.
Harinder, we should be fearful for the safety of Sri Lankan citizens living in the United States. Do you agree? Do you think that it's at that state?
No, I don't think so.
You've already seen attacks. Remember, you've already seen attacks happening on minority groups.
Well, I mean,
we're also, Sri Lankan citizens who have migrated there or who are there for work purposes.
Some of them may have voted
they all
for Trump.
fall into the immigrant...
Some of them, no, I think we're getting something wrong. Trump just didn't get the white vote, working class. They got the vote of the immigrants. Their idea was 60% white, 40% black and Mexican immigrants, because...
No, I'm not saying that Trump is going to, or that the US government is going to attack these immigrants. What I'm saying is that you've seen the rise, as you yourself mentioned, of so-called hate groups. And these hate groups have carried out attacks on minority groups.
But I think those
should we therefore fear for the safety of Sri Lankan citizens in the United States?
I think we should fear. I mean, if you are talking like that, we can say we should be fear for Sri Lankan citizens who might be knocked down from a road accident or from a car crash in the United States more than a hate group attack. So it's like trying to say, it's the same equation, more people die in the US. So I don't think, I think this...
How is that the same equation?
No, I'm trying to say...
You can see these groups have risen for specific reasons.
Yeah.
There is causality there, why these groups have risen. What analysts have called a campaign that was based on like you yourself said, division and fear.
It was a divisive campaign, but I think when the hate groups, the way the hate is channeled, that changes. If in Britain, Germany, Poland, after a football match, if you are brown and you're walking that, you would be taken down by a hooligan. So who also represent the so-called neo-Nazi groups. But what I'm trying to say in the US is that just because you're brown, it doesn't mean you'll be targeted. Because there was a major campaign for Trump by the American Indians, who were mostly the Hindus for Trump. So just because you're a brown, just because you're a minority, I don't think there is.
But at the same time, there have been attacks on Sikh groups on Sikh groups.
Yeah, that's because they thought they were Muslims. So the answer is here. This is the thing. Minorities. If you're a Sri Lankan Muslim... So
what's to stop them from thinking that you're a Muslim?
If you're a Sri Lankan Muslim...
If a monk goes dressed in a robe, that's something foreign to them. It's not something they see commonly.
There is a chance.
So there is a danger.
There is a danger, yes. To
there
any
is a heightened danger.
Any minority in the US, just as like a gay, if you're a gay or a lesbian, or you're a transsexual, if you're a college professor in the US, they face the same risk from these hate groups.
Yeah, but do you agree that there is now a heightened danger? That risk is now
at a higher level
Than before, yes.
than it was before.
After the election, yes.
Dr. Harin, I want to come back to the Syrian war that we were discussing earlier as well. Now, you have the rebels, you have the Assad government, and then you have ISIS. Now, under the Obama administration, you had the United States supporting and funding these rebel groups to fight against a legitimate government.
Yes.
Why?
Well, the Americans always thought they had to get rid of Assad because he didn't fall in line with the way, and they thought the US clearly wanted him out. Of course, you had Obama's red line where, if they use chemical weapons. So the Americans were, but the problem the Americans had was they were bogged down too much in Middle East. They couldn't risk a third American front opening up. So they went to the old formula of like what they did in Afghanistan with the Soviets. They thought the best way to to take down Assad was use the rebels. If you remember when they asked General Petraeus, how do you deal with ISIS? Why don't we arm the Taliban, the Al-Qaeda to get rid of ISIS? So this mentality of how Americans kind of thought about using rebels, they always had this thing of using different groups to take, to achieve political objectives, and that also has always gone wrong. But I don't know why they keep on sustaining this thing. But then there is the larger argument that the Americans would always prefer a destabilized Middle East.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. We have to wrap it up at that as far as the 4 rounds are concerned. But before we go, just a very simple question, Dr. Vidyanagi. I want a very quick answer from you. I'll give you around 20 to 25 seconds to respond to this. Now, I am a Muslim. I have been to the United States as a CNN fellow in the year 2007. I was in the US in 2012 as a Dag Hammarskjöld fellow, spent 4 months with the United Nations. Let's talk about the Fulbright program. There are many Muslims who go to the United States to study on their Fulbright scholarships, on Hubert Humphrey. I know many Pakistanis who have gone to the United States to pursue their higher education. Given the statement made by Trump, will there be a threat to Muslims across the world to go to the United States in the future?
Definitely yes.
Will there be?
Definitely yes. You hear, there are a lot of evictions in aircraft these days. For somebody speaking in Arabic, American would say, I'm worried you will be evicted just because you're a Muslim and you
Thank
speak
you very
Arabic.
much,
Yes.
Dr. Vidyanagi, for your thoughts on the 4th round as well. It's quite a pity because individuals had the opportunity before to go to the United States freely, obtain their higher education, obtain their teachings, learnings, and bring that back to the subcontinent. Where is the world really heading? Where is the United States really heading? Is this the way forward? All this and more of a short commercial break. The impact on the subcontinent. This is Face the Nation. Stay connected, stay with us. We will be right back.